So all of you can hear me. That's great. That's the start. I'm Dede Wilson of FODMAP Every Day, and we are thrilled to be doing this webinar along with the folks from Fodzyme, and we have dietitians for you. So we are here, as you know, to discuss the strategies for successfully managing the low FODMAP diet, and we are going to particularly be paying focus on the third phase. Now, we are fully aware that some of you are brand new to the diet. Some of you are in the middle. Maybe some of you have reached the third phase. So we're going to try to cover a little bit of everything, but this is really focusing on the goal, right? Because the goal of the diet is to get all of us to a point where we are eating as broadly as possible without triggering IBS symptoms. So what is this integration phase, which is sometimes called the personalization phase? This is the phase that you get to after you've gone through a structured elimination phase and challenge phase. And now at that point, you'll have your data, the data that's specific to you. You'll know what foods are triggering you. You will know what amounts. So for instance, for me, maybe I'll be able to eat half an apple, but not a whole apple, but maybe you can eat a whole apple. So it's very personal. It's why it's very important to work with a registered dietitian and have a structured elimination and challenge phase. And for those of us who need a really quick overview of FODMAPs, of course, they stand for fermentable. The acronym stands for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And these are the short chain carbohydrates that have been shown clinically to trigger IBS symptoms. And for 75% of us who have IBS, and that's millions of us all over the world, the low FODMAP diet can provide relief. But of course, that's only if you work through it correctly. And there definitely are ways to do it right. And what we mean by right is we're trying to get you to a point where you are symptom and pain free. And an elimination diet like the low FODMAP diet is going to help you get there. As this slide is reminding us, this is a very common gut problem. As I mentioned, millions of people all over the world are suffering with it, so you are not alone. One thing that we like to point out is, even though IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, is not curable, which is a very scary thing to think about, what's important to know is that the symptoms are manageable. And so for each of us, how we manage our symptoms ultimately is going to look a little different. We're all going to have a unique approach. And we mentioned the three phases of the diet. In the very beginning, we have the elimination phase, which is meant to be short, an average of 4 weeks. It'll give and take specifically for you, how long it takes for you to calm your symptoms. Working with a dietitian is so helpful. They'll be able to help you fine-tune your elimination phase. The challenge phase, which is also referred to as the reintroduction phase, is where you're going to be systematically reintroducing foods, one food at a time, one FODMAP at a time. And this is where you're going to really start getting the picture of your personal relationship to FODMAPs. One of the things we always like to point out, because we run a lot of Facebook groups, which a lot of you know, is that, there are great ways to use social media, and then there are ways that are not as helpful. And one of the ways that really can send you awry is by talking to other people online about, well, how do you do with celery? Or how do you do with apple? Because really, how they digest those foods has no bearing necessarily on how you do. Each of us our digestive tracts are unique, they're individual. So a structured elimination and challenge phase, especially worked through with a registered dietitian, is going to help you get to the place where you understand your triggers. And once you do understand your triggers, you're at this great place where you've reintroduced some foods into your diet that do contain FODMAPs. This is important because that's ultimately what is going to be healthiest for your gut microbiome. But sometimes, there are foods that are still going to be trigger foods for you. And that's where Other techniques and tools and products like Fodzyme are going to be able to help you eat some foods that might still trigger you, but you can take advantage of what they offer nutritionally. So we have a poll here. Have you gone through the elimination and challenge phase? We would love to know where you guys are in the scope of things. Maybe some of you are just starting, you're in your first month. Maybe you're going through your challenge phase, which can sometimes last a couple of months. So let us know. You should be able to see a poll that has popped up on your screen at this point. And we would love to get an idea of who's in our audience today so we can tailor our approach a little bit. One thing I'd like to say about, we'll let the poll stay up for about a minute. You know, the thing about the elimination phase, and this is definitely a pet peeve of mine, even doctors sometimes use the terminology incorrectly. You'll hear doctors or people say, the low FODMAP diet is not a forever diet. It's not good to stay on it for too long. And really, if we want to talk about it in a more helpful, specific way, what those phrases are addressing is the elimination phase. It is very true that the elimination phase is not meant to be stayed on for very long. There are some reasons not to nutritionally, which we'll get to a little later. But the low FODMAP diet, as our prior screens showed you, it is a 3-phase diet. And by the time you get to the integration phase, to that last phase, that is long-term. And it's also not static. Once you get to that place, let's say after your challenge phase, you're still not doing so well with apples. It doesn't mean you can't eat apples ever. 6 months down the line, 9 months down the line, you should retry apples again. And very often we see that people make advances in what they can eat. Okay, so this is really interesting. We have people have gone through all 3 phases. Wow, I'm actually surprised to see that, but really impressed. Awesome. We've got some educated people here. All right, I'm going to end the poll right now so we can move on. Hesitant to move on. The 27% of you who are saying you're in elimination and you're hesitant, we are definitely going to address that. So I'm assuming that those of you who said that, and it's almost a third of you, is you're in the elimination phase, you're feeling fantastic, and so now you're saying, I feel good. I have no need to move on. If I never eat another apple in my life, but I don't have to be in pain, that's okay with me. But the thing is that it is really important for you to move through the phases of the diet. They're there because not only do we want to have you eventually have a positive relationship with food, because psychologically, your relationship with food is very important. I mean, think about getting together with friends at their homes. Think about going out to restaurants. Think about just when you're sitting at home. You don't want to be thinking about deprivation. You don't want to be thinking about what you can't have. You want to be thinking about that you have a positive relationship with food. You understand your relationship with food. And then health-wise, physically, you need to move. You need to move into the challenge phase and into the integration phase. You need to start working with those in Monash University terms, right? The yellow light foods and the red light foods. And Beth Rosen, who's our RD on with us today, is going to get a little more into that very soon. So here's the thing. We were just talking about why you would want to integrate well-tolerated foods into your daily routine. Well, this is the easy one, right? If you're tolerating a food, you're going to reintroduce it and reintegrate it into your weekly routine. But also understand that there are things other than your FODMAP tolerance that could affect how you react to a food. Stress, hormones, your sleep or lack thereof. There are many, many things that can affect our IBS symptoms and whether they're breaking through. Then, of course, we have stacking, which is, are we eating too many FODMAPs at once? Like I said, Maybe that half an apple works just fine for you, but a whole apple doesn't. So we have to have a good understanding of stacking as well and how it reacts for us. And it gets really specific, right? So maybe you can tolerate a half a cup of oats, but you can't 2 days in a row. It can really get that specific. So even though the Monash app might tell you what a low FODMAP serving is, it might not be your low FODMAP serving. And going through a structured elimination and challenge phase and getting to that integration phase, if you do it properly, you're going to have that data that applies to you at that point. So over time, you are going to be able to expand your diet. And this is, I know it's really hard for people to understand, especially in the beginning. By the time I discovered the low FODMAP diet, I had been dealing with pain and IBS for 25 years. So I empathize. And we know that some of you are, you're always 10 feet from the bathroom, you're carrying around your antispasmodics, you're wearing your elastic waist pants. You're not alone, right? But what we want to have you know is that the low FODMAP diet, for those who are sensitive and reactive to FODMAPs, can absolutely change your life, and it can give you your life back. And eventually you are going to be able to be eating much more broadly than when you first started the diet. So now the moderately tolerated foods, right? So what about those foods that you're still a little worried about integrating? Here are some great tips. Pick just a few of your moderately tolerated foods and add a serving just every few days, and start with the ones that you want the most, right? So if onions are your thing, then you're going to really want to understand your relationship with onions. If you don't like onions, that there's no point in working yourself into a tizzy, trying to integrate those into your diet. So start with the foods that you really miss, that you really want. Really look at, how often you might be able to eat them, what serving sizes you might be able to eat them in. Avoid eating too much at once, because that might just give you a negative result. You'll get an IBS symptom and you might feel like giving up. But remember, it is really that nuanced. You don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater, as we like to say. It could just be a serving size portion. And then we have the red light foods, right? And you're thinking, well, if I know a food, if I know I react to a food, what am I going to do? Well, here's the thing. They can't always be avoided, particularly when we're out and about in the world, right? If we're a scratch cook, if we're working at home, we can control pretty closely what's going into our meals. But that's not 100% of the time for any of us. We're out, we're getting lunch with coworkers, we're going to someone's birthday party. So you want to be able to know that you can be in those situations and still be able to tolerate the foods. Also, as we've said before, the low FODMAP diet is not about eliminating any whole food group. It is not about eliminating any food in total. Remember, it is the low FODMAP diet. It is not the no FODMAP diet. And part of that is because of the nutritional aspect. It could actually be harmful to fully eliminate any particularly individual foods or food groups. So when we're reintroducing red foods, there are strategies. So, look at the FODMAP in that food, stay away from other foods that day that do contain that FODMAP, so you can control the stacking a little better. And then this is where an enzyme like Fodzyme can really come into play. And we'll get into that. So this is the end of my portion of the presentation. And as we said in the beginning, so the goal of the low FODMAP diet is to help you reach the most diverse and nutritious diet possible. And this is because the excess of restriction would leave you with nutritional intake that's overly limited, and it would also affect you socially, emotionally. So we're going to go into the rest of the presentation. We've got Beth Rosen here, who's a dietitian. We have the team from Fodzyme, and they're going to take it from here. So stick with us.
Thanks, Dede. I appreciate that introduction. Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here to talk to you a little bit about why it's so important to know that the low FODMAP diet is not just a one-phase elimination diet, and in fact, it's 3 phases, and the importance of moving from the first phase relatively quickly to the second phase, which is reintroduction or challenge, and then eventually get to that place where you're living your life with the low FODMAP diet, plus the foods that you tolerate well, plus the foods that you're able to eat with digestive enzyme therapy as well. And we're going to get to that part too. So some of the reasons why we get stuck in the elimination phase is that, once we find something that works, who wants to go back to not feeling well? And so it makes sense to want to stick with what's working. And it also could be scary to add those foods back. So that makes sense as well. And another reason might be that you may not realize that by sticking with the elimination phase over the long term may have some negative effects on your health. So here's another poll. You might have answered it if it popped up earlier, but what has been your biggest obstacle during the integration phase? Some people don't even want to get there, so that might be part of it as well. But I'd love for you to take a minute and take the poll, and let's see what's causing a challenge for you during this switch to the third phase of the low FODMAP diet. Everybody have a chance to answer that. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. What's important about this is to really know what your challenge is. Then you can work with your healthcare team to decide what the best way is for you to get to this point. As Dede had said earlier, just because you don't tolerate a food when you're doing the challenge doesn't mean you might not be able to tolerate that food in the future. You can give your gut a chance to do some healing and then try it again. And really the worst thing that will happen is that you have some symptoms, but once you know what's causing the symptoms, it's easier to stop them than before you ever did the diet at all. So that's the important piece, is to know that you may have some discomfort during the conversion from elimination to challenge. But then once you know what's bothering you, there's your poll. Once you know what's bothering you, then you can decide whether or not you avoid it, or if you retry it again, or if you use digestive enzyme therapy to help you to eat those foods in the future. So you've got some choices there with the poll. Some people might have a fear of food causing symptoms to return. And again, that could be temporary because you know which food would be doing that if you're adding them back in one by one. And then knowing what portions to try. And some of that can come from the Monash app, but some of that can come from what you know to be true about your body, because everybody's an individual, and so everyone's going to have a different experience. Like Dede said, she can have half an apple, maybe not a whole apple. For a while, I couldn't even have a quarter of an apple. Now I can have a whole apple. I also have IBS for about 13 years. So I understand what it feels like to retest and retest until you can get some of those foods back. And it's worth the challenge so that you can have that opportunity to liberalize your diet as much as possible. Okay, so maybe we can get those full answers up. See if we can see that. Well, we'll just progress for now, and then we can go back to the answers once they pop up here. But so the reason why we should be moving on and eating high FODMAP foods. Oh, here we go. Okay, so let's just see. About a quarter of you have already, Nope, we need to scroll down a little bit. Sorry about that. So the majority of you, about half of you, find that the fear of foods causing symptoms to return is the biggest obstacle. And second is that you haven't gotten there. And that makes sense. And hopefully you will get there soon. But again, that fear isn't the same fear, or shouldn't be the same fear as it was before you even went on the elimination phase, because now you know what food caused it. If you're introducing one food at a time, you'll know which food it is that did that. And then you can just decide not to have it or use digestive enzyme therapy if it's appropriate. And we can find ways to make you comfortable as you head through the phases all the way to integrating in the high FODMAP foods, or the foods with the red foods. So reasons for the reintroduction include needing fiber in your diet. And when you're on the elimination phase, there's a chance that you are having a low intake of fiber, especially if you've switched some of your grains over to gluten-free grains. Some of them are refined, so they don't have the fiber in them. Another reason to move ahead is because it could contribute to nutritional deficiencies. When you're not eating a wide variety of foods, you miss out on micronutrients that are plentiful in some of the foods that we're not getting. Dede had mentioned the social isolation. That piece can really affect us, especially once we've been through this global pandemic, to further isolate us, that we can't go out and meet with people on a sunny day or at a restaurant and not know what's in the food and not trust it and feel uncomfortable. And last, but certainly not least, is the risk of disordered eating. So we know that restrictive eating leads to eating disorders in some folks, but disordered eating or maladaptive eating can happen just from a fear of food, anxiety about food. So we want to make sure that we're not risking those things. So by going ahead and reintroducing foods, we can reduce the risk of a lack of fiber in our diet. And the importance of having fiber in our diet is that it increases the likelihood that we'll be able to poop regularly. So it reduces the risks of constipation coming back for those who have IBS with constipation predominance. It also helps us to manage our blood glucose and our cholesterol levels, and it reduces our risk for colorectal cancer. So those are great reasons to continue on the phases and come off of the elimination phase. But in addition to that, there are also nutritional deficiencies that we can have. Some of the big nutrients that we see in those deficiencies are vitamin B12, D, calcium, iron. So we want to make sure that we're getting a variety of foods, because a variety of foods can offer us being more close to optimal health when we can get all the nutrients our body needs to function. And some of those nutrients may be nutrients that help us absorb other foods or other nutrients. So it's important that we don't skimp on any of them. Again, as I had mentioned, that social isolation, my brain, could be an issue, as well as disordered eating. So the reason why it's so important that we eat high FODMAP foods is because the microbes that live in our gut feed off of them, and they get the opportunity to ferment short chain fatty acids. If you see up there, SCFAs. And what happens with those is that our gut microbes ferment it, and they provide us with so many benefits when they do that. So it protects our GI tract from getting irritated. It helps prevent against inflammation, and it also can reduce our risk of colon cancer. So there are some foods that contain fiber that are part of the high FODMAP foods, and you'll see here the galacto-oligosaccharides, lactose, fructans, and excess fructose. So these things are the ones that can be avoided, but you see the importance of adding them back in, because look at all the nutrients we can get from eating these foods. So we want to ensure that there is nutritional diversity during the integration phase. And we can do that by choosing smaller portions of the high FODMAP foods, and that will help us to avoid stacking. So what that looks like is having lots of portions of high FODMAP foods in the same meal that then create a high FODMAP meal that we can't tolerate. So for instance, if you're going to have mixed vegetables in a dish, you may want to have some green beans mixed in with your asparagus, or carrots mixed in with your Brussels sprouts, sort of to just lower the level of FODMAP so that you can see what can be tolerated by you and then increase that high FODMAP food within the meal in that time. You can also use digestive enzyme therapy like Fodzyme. Digestive enzymes do occur naturally in the body, and we can have deficiencies or no longer produce them, or in the case of all the FODMAPs, with the exception of lactose, we don't produce those digestive enzymes, which is why as people with IBS, we feel the consequences of that fermentation happening. So with the use of a digestive enzyme, it can help to break down those longer chain fibers and help with digestion and reduce the risk of having symptoms. And of course, consulting with a FODMAP trained dietitian. If you go onto the FODMAP Everyday website, there's a directory there to find one. That would probably be the best way to help you to navigate this if you're struggling on your own. Okay, so now I'm going to pass this off to Anjie from Fodzyme.
Thank you so much, Beth. Hi, everyone. My name is Anjie. I'm one of the co-founders of Kiwi Biosciences, the biotech company behind Fodzyme. And like both Dede and Beth, all of the speakers so far, I also have IBS and am a FODMAP sensitive individual. And Fodzyme was initially something I started developing for myself, so I can eat fructans again. So the garlic and onions and wheats of the world were my biggest triggers. And I started Kiwi Biosciences with my co-founder, David, to directly tackle this FODMAP issue. So I'll take the baton and switch gears a little bit to tell you guys about the magical world of enzymes and how they specifically relate to FODMAPs. This is a topic we're obviously extremely passionate about in the Fodzyme team, and I'm really excited to dive in. But just before we start, I'd love to hear from you all, maybe in the chat, some of the enzymes that you are familiar with, just to kick off the topic. And thank you so much for some of the very kind words in the chat. So any enzymes that are, any types of enzymes that you guys think of. Oh, interesting. Everyone's going for the branded enzymes. All right, there we have some pineapple enzymes, indeed. We'll get into a little bit of those, where enzymes are and their ubiquity and the very, very fascinating biochemistry behind it. Lactase is definitely something that we'll be mentioning. Just to start with a little bit of rudimentary biochemistry, enzymes are basically proteins. So they're chains of amino acids, but they're not just any protein. They're highly specialized proteins that are folded in particularly unique and intricate ways. And that particular folding and shape endows it with special abilities, that is, the capabilities to change up other molecules that are known as the enzyme substrates. And there are many types of enzymes out there. I know folks have been putting in the chat a lot of branded enzymes, but really enzymes make up the whole world, the whole biological world. There are classes of enzymes that join molecules together, others that transfer one part of a molecule to another, and even enzymes that rearrange the atoms within a substrate molecule. Today, we're going to be specifically talking about enzymes that cleave or break down a molecule into smaller parts, and that'll be relevant for FODMAP specifically. So think of this type of enzymes as like minuscule scissors. Before we dive in further, it's also helpful to understand a pattern in enzyme nomenclature. So scientific enzyme names typically end with ACE, ASE, and also have some part of the word in common with the substrate the enzyme works on. So lactose, a sugar found in milk, and also a member of the notorious FODMAP squad, is the substrate of lactase. So lactase is the enzyme. Some of you guys mentioned this in the chat, and that breaks down lactose. And typically enzymes are highly specific, meaning that they only act upon one type of substrate. So think of them as different scissors that can each only cut one type of material. There's a pair of scissors for paper, a pair of scissors for rubber bands, and you can't use the rubber band scissors on paper. So analogously, you can't use lactase enzyme to break down, say, fructan. One fascinating thing about enzymes is how ubiquitous they are. So again, many of you folks think immediately to kind of enzyme supplements on the market, but and many of you are also probably aware that our digestive tract secretes various types of digestive enzymes, starting from the mouth as you chew down to the pancreatic enzymes secreted in your intestines to break down the fats and carbs and proteins and help you absorb your meal. But there are more enzymes all throughout your body in every cell that catalyze the essential metabolic processes that keep us alive. And they're not just in humans, but in every animal, plant, fungus, microorganism cell. In fact, the very FODMAP content of the fruits and veggies and cereals that give us so much problems is regulated by the enzymes within them. So the bottom line is that enzymes keep the whole biological world running, and they are very powerful. So now, what does this have to do with FODMAPs? As I've hinted just now, certain enzymes are able to snip down FODMAPs, but our bodies don't actually produce them, with the exception of lactase. And that's why FODMAPs like fructan or galacto-oligosaccharides go through our gut undigested and then become food for our microbiome, which can trigger symptoms. The good news is that we can supplement with enzymes to help break down certain FODMAPs and thereby reduce their presence in our gut. And then it's fairly obvious how that can help by reducing the overall FODMAP content in a meal. There's more room for stacking, and you're eliminating some quantity of the triggers that cause symptoms. This can enable you to eat much more foods that otherwise might cause too much discomfort. And the greater the variety of food, the greater the variety of nutrients, as well as freedom in social settings. So now's the time to introduce Fodzyme. Fodzyme is an enzyme blend specifically designed to target FODMAPs, and it helps with most FODMAP groups. It breaks down lactose, galacto-oligosaccharides, and most excitingly, fructan, which I've peeked at the polls is, well, next to, I don't know, the biggest group of FODMAPs that you guys have most trouble with. And so Fodzyme breaks down lactose, galacto-oligosaccharides, fructan into simple sugars that are quickly absorbed in your small intestine to prevent the FODMAPs from wreaking havoc lower down the GI tract. We recommend you review your yellow and red foods once you get to there. That is the troublesome foods for you from that challenge phase of your FODMAP journey, and see which fall under these specific groups that Fodzyme can help with: lactose, galacto-oligosaccharides, and fructan. And now I think it's time to get to that third part of the poll. I may have given away some of the results, but did folks already do this? All right, so the results. Well, most of you, no, the greater portion of you guys, or the largest, the the most frequent answer was I am not sure, followed by fructan, which is my personal little nemesis. And some folks say all of the above. We have a little bit of everything here. Well, thank you guys for answering that. We do have some good news for the folks who are sensitive to fructan, galacto-oligosaccharides, and lactose. So as mentioned before, enzymes are not a one-size-fits-all. They're highly specific. So as mentioned, fructan hydrolase are one of our active ingredients in Fodzyme, would not be able to break down lactose, and similarly, lactase would not be able to break down fructan. Currently, there's no commercially available enzyme for polyols like mannitol and sorbitol. And for those of you who are sensitive to that, don't lose hope. Our research and development team is hard at work innovating a new enzyme to specifically target polyols. I do want to say that is an endeavor that will take some time. We have some customers who kind of check in with us every month and they're like, is it ready yet? And we're like, well, these types of innovations do take more time than that. So bear with us. And then I'll hand it off to.
No.
Thank you, Anjie. I think we lost Anjie just at that moment. Hi, everyone. I'm David. I'm Angie's co-founder at Kiwi Biosciences, the company behind Fodzyme. And unlike perhaps a good portion of you, I don't suffer from any gut disorders, although I am sensitive to some FODMAPs, which is, of course, possible. But my story with gut health comes from grad school, where one of my research projects involved taking pictures of stool for patients with IBS, and hence I was named the poop guy in grad school. And so besides the passion for enzymes, I do have a passion for good bowel movements, if that makes sense. Picking up from where Anjie left off, I wanted to mention that when combining all three active enzymes in Fodzyme, we arrived at a simple and elegant formula that is not bloated with other active or other ingredients, that is just purely the enzyme and one single stabilizer that is necessary to ensure the enzymes stay active, folded over long periods of time. So again, very clean, simple formula. And we optimize it to break down, as we've mentioned, all these FODMAPs, which make up the majority of the FODMAPs in stomach conditions. And I'll talk a little bit about how that specifically works. And now I'd like to point out two of the main innovations behind Fodzyme that we've hinted to them previously. So first of all, up until now, the only way to avoid fructans in foods like garlic, onion, banana, wheat, was by avoiding those delicious and nutritious foods altogether. And unlike dairy products with lactose in them, avoiding high fructan foods can be quite a challenge, especially when dining out. And with Fodzyme's novel fructan hydrolase, there is a new alternative where you can directly target those fructans and break them down in those foods. And again, just to really emphasize on this point, other enzymes like lactase or alpha-galactosidase will not break down fructans, given their lack of specificity to that particular sugar or FODMAP. And the second layer of innovation, this is a very important one, comes from our realization that developing or finding the right enzymes is not enough. How enzymes are administered matters equally as much. And when it comes to enzymes, time is of the essence. Enzymes like the ones in Fodzyme have a limited time to do their job, and that is to break down those FODMAPs. And we found that putting them in capsules or caplets actually delays and prevents the enzymes from properly mixing and homogenizing with the food that they're supposed to break down. However, when mixing the enzymes directly on the food and chewing the food afterwards, we're giving the enzymes a huge advantage, which produces superior results. And we've tested that many, many times over to make sure it's correct. And, you know, the actual credit to this kind of method of delivery probably goes to nature and evolution. As Anjie alluded to earlier, our salivary glands have evolved to produce amylase type of enzymes, which are not targeting FODMAPs. They target starches, and they break them down as we chew it. And it's not surprising that that happens in our mouth as we chew the food. So that's very analogous to how we propose to administer Fodzyme, to really make sure that it starts working as soon as possible. I wanted to make a small note on taste, as obviously we're suggesting to sprinkle the enzymes directly on the food. That's our best tip. And is that we've been improving the formula of our Fodzyme to make it virtually tasteless when mixing the food. Just a small note. And so with Fodzyme, a whole new world of food options opens up when combining the right enzymes and the right delivery mechanism. And here are just a few examples of many, many other foods that Fodzyme enzymes can make painless. And borrowing from the great philosopher Stan Lee, with greater power comes greater responsibility. And of course, all of what we said so far can seem exciting, but it comes with a trade-off, which is that Fodzyme has to be used correctly. And it's a bit more intricate and difficult than just taking a pill or a capsule. But once you learn these few but very important tips, using Fodzyme becomes quite easy on a day-to-day basis. So the first tip is, as we mentioned earlier, we recommend sprinkling Fodzyme's enzymes directly on the food and mixing it well. And in the cases where you have foods where you cannot mix it, say pizza or a taco or something like that, we recommend sprinkling a dose of Fodzyme on a little corner of the food and chewing with the first bite. Enzymes, unfortunately, are not heat stable, and they won't survive high temperatures like the ones we use to cook food. And therefore, we don't recommend using Fodzyme while you're cooking. So that's a very important thing to remember. The enzymes will not survive that process. And for long meals, which of course is what we love to do with friends and family members, we recommend adding an extra dose after 30 minutes, just in case. And especially in meals where you have multiple plates like tapas, you can use one of those Fodzyme stick packs and sprinkle a little bit of powder on each tapa and keep it on the side every time a new plate comes. So those are the best tips. Couple more is remember that Fodzyme cannot currently tackle polyols. So for those of you who are sensitive to polyols, keep that in mind. Although for those of you who might be sensitive to polyols and other FODMAPs, Fodzyme might help reduce the overall amount of FODMAPs in your system. So that's something to look forward to. And finally, chew well. That's generally a good habit to have, but an even better one to develop with Fodzyme to really help the enzymes getting to the food as you chew it. Finally, I wanted to briefly tell you about our latest piece of scientific research that was recently published in a peer-reviewed journal. And for those of you who are interested, we have links on our website to our scientific brief, which summarizes these results in more detail. So what we did here is we actually tested Fodzyme in a simulated gut. It's a really, really cool system, which actually simulates all the cavities in your GI tract from top to bottom. and it's a quite sophisticated system. There's a little diagram on the bottom right of the slide. In real life, it looks a little bit more yucky, to put it mildly. So diagram is good for now, but you can appreciate how this is, a pretty sophisticated system. And although it's just a model that is trying to simulate a real human gut, it allowed us to do very precise measurements on the efficacy of Fodzyme. So for example, we found that in a simulated stomach, which is one of the first stages of this system, Fodzyme can degrade over 90% of an average amount of fructan within 30 minutes. And that really convinced us that, or proved, that Fodzyme can operate well in stomach conditions. We also found that while reducing gas production, Fodzyme reduced but did not deplete the production of some very important molecules that we mentioned earlier, called short-chain fatty acids. And with that, I will end my section and give the mic back to Beth, who's going to talk to us a little bit about short-chain fatty acids and why they're so important.
Thanks, David. So I did mention this earlier, but short-chain fatty acids are produced by the microbes in our gut. So all those little bugs that live in there feed off fiber and produce short-chain fatty acids. And those short-chain fatty acids have a benefit in our gut. So it's important that we get them, and they can help with reducing the osmotic load, which means that could be less bloat for you. It can improve your gut barrier integrity, so tighten up those junctions and help with fat and sugar and carbohydrate metabolism. And it can also help us with the inflammatory response. So if besides IBS, you also get hives or find that you get inflamed in joints and things like that from some foods, having short-chain fatty acids may be able to help that. And the way that Fodzyme helps is that while you're on the elimination diet, you're completely eliminating, for the most part, the fermentable carbohydrates, or the fibers that the microbes feed off of. But if you're using Fodzyme, then you may be limiting them, but we're not depleting them. So your body is still getting those benefits of the short-chain fatty acids, which is great for overall colonic health. So there's benefit to using the enzymes and not necessarily eliminating all FODMAPs if you're not a candidate for the low FODMAP diet, or if there's a history of eating disorders. Using the enzyme may be just as helpful, with the benefit of having short-chain fatty acids in the system as well.
So I just want to jump in here. So we do have a bunch of questions. Do we want to move to answering those questions, folks?
That'd be a great idea.
I've looked at we have the questions compiled, and I'm just going to go through a few really quickly that I know I can answer, because we want to try to get to everyone. Someone wants to know if you have severe IBSD, can you ever not leave phase 1 of the diet? So what we would suggest is that you work with a registered dietitian one-on-one. There could be something going on for you that's beyond FODMAPs. Another question, someone said they were using Fodzyme during the holidays. They're in elimination phase. They're about to be reintroducing. Should they still continue to use Fodzyme? And the answer to that would be no. We really want you to be using Fodzyme once you get to integration. Certainly for the holidays, if there was a really short-term period of time where you were using it, that was fine. But all of this information is on the website, on the Fodzyme website. It'll help you understand how better to use it. Here, Beth, this is for you. Recommendations for balancing glucose with fructose to enhance fructose intolerance. That's like a basic question, right? That's not really pertinent to the Fodzyme conversation.
Well, the point is that in FODMAPs, excess fructose is the issue, not fructose itself. So glucose and fructose in food partnered at a 1-to-1 ratio helps with the digestion. So fructose needs glucose as a partner for absorption. We can't really on a molecular level know how much glucose we need to pair up with fructose. So we sort of stay away from those foods during the elimination phase that have excess fructose. So there's really no way to sort of make a food that has excess fructose have a 1-to-1 ratio. The question below that one, oh, there you go.
There you go.
The question below that one, somebody had asked about discussing or navigating integration personalization phase while in recovery for an eating disorder, thinking about triggers like keeping a food diary. And I would say this is why it's important to work with your team, not just your registered dietitian who's helping you with your eating disorder, but having a GI dietitian who can also help with this part, who may be ed informed, which could be helpful. You do not need to keep a diary if it's triggering you. What's important is that you're adding back foods and that you're doing exposure therapy so that all foods that don't cause harm can fit. And by harm, I mean symptoms, not eating disorder issues. So it's important to work with your dietitians, to work with your therapist, to liberalize your diet as much as possible. And that's where Fodzyme might make life easier for you.
And we have articles at FODMAP every day written by Monash University trained RDs specifically addressing disordered eating. So you might come take a look at that. We have a question about if enzymes like Fodzyme are helpful, how much should we be relying on them? Do they reduce our long-term tolerance? Who wants to field that?
I'm happy to take it.
Sure.
So as we probably mentioned earlier, we don't naturally produce enzymes to address FODMAPs with the exception of lactose. Therefore, in general, we're not building up any dependency to enzymes that address these FODMAPs. So in general, yeah, I would say that there is no necessary concern about that aspect.
How about Beth? What do you tell patients who say, you know, my IBS keeps getting worse. I used to be able to eat apples and asparagus. Now I can't.
When they were on the elimination phase or haven't been on the diet?
Yeah, this isn't specific. They're not specific.
Yeah.
But we hear that a lot.
So in the past, if you were able to eat those things and then you were diagnosed with IBS, something along the line changed, whether it was a sudden onset of IBS. We don't really know what causes it. Could have been a foodborne illness that started it, but it does happen that when you're diagnosed with IBS, some of the foods you might have been eating your whole life or considered yourself having an iron stomach and can eat all the foods, that's going to change. And that part stinks. But the good thing is that we do have the FODMAP diet, which is really effective for so many people. I think it's up to 88% effective, which is a lot of folks. And then with the addition of digestive enzyme therapy, that's going to raise the number even higher. So while some foods are not going to be tolerable in the beginning, once you've given your gut a chance to calm down from being exposed to fermentable carbohydrates, you may be able to add those things back. And so I'd say just give it time. And you're not alone. There's 12 to 15% of the world's population has this. So find support where you can.
Then we have another timing question. Someone said they unfortunately were not told that the diet was 3-phase. They stayed on the elimination phase for years. And then when they tried to reintroduce it, it went horribly. Work with a FODMAP trained registered dietitian. We promise you there's light at the end of the tunnel. Being able to have someone help you design a structured way that works for you, right? So like 37% of you have something else going on. You're diabetic, you have GERD, you have SIBO, like whatever it is, it can be really complex. And so working with a dietitian, they're going to help you hold your hand through the reintroduction phase so that you can get it done. Someone else says their symptoms are definitely better, but then every now and then they still react to green portions of food. And so what, we would say to that is it's really important to remember that your GI tract is not static. I mean, nothing about this is static, right? One day you might have, your hormones might be different. You didn't sleep well. There's a stress you're related to. Maybe there's some stacking going on with what you ate, throughout the day that you're not aware of. So, for that to happen, for there to be like a breakthrough symptom with something, is not unusual, but it's also nothing to panic about. You know what I mean? Just keep on with what you're doing, and you'll see that there are fluctuations as you go. Luckily, IBS is not a life-threatening disease. So, you know, we're going to be dealing with some uncomfort from time to time. Anything specific to IBS and Crohn's together? Well, I'm not really sure what this question means. Do you mean in relation to Fodzyme or in relation to just managing in general? We actually have a registered dietitian who works with us at FODMAP every day who specializes on the intersection of IBS and IBD. So I would say come to the website and read Colleen Webb's articles. I think we have at least 3, and they're probably going to address some of your questions. Should I be taking an enzyme on a regular basis? Someone want to take that?
I mean, I can take that. I would just say that, you know, really a conclusion of some of the things that have been said on the webinar is that this really depends on who you are, who is this I in this questions.
And working with a dietitian who can help you understand how best to use the enzyme therapy would be the answer, right?
Precisely.
Someone wants to know if you can build up a tolerance, and do you need more Fodzyme over time?
So there's no reason to suggest that there would be this kind of tolerance that would be built up. And anecdotally speaking, so just as a caveat, this isn't anecdotally only, but we have customers telling us that they actually need to use less over time. And as Dede has mentioned, your gut is not static, introducing new nutrients into your microbiome. It's still like a very understudied sphere. Things can change over time. You might have less sensitivity, or things can fluctuate with depending on a lot of different factors. But there's no reason to believe that just taking the enzyme is going to somehow make you need more over time.
So we are, Robin, do you guys want to let us know what you want to do time-wise? We have come to the top of the hour. We do still have more questions. What do we want to do?
So I was going to make a recommendation that we take all of the remaining questions and that we include them in the follow-up email that I will send probably by the end of the week or sometime over the weekend once I take the recording of this session and make it into something a little more presentable. I will send it back out to all of the registrants with that link, and then maybe we can actually go through the questions and organize them and have Anjie and Beth and David and you, Dede, be able to answer them. And then we can send that all out to everybody. Does that make sense for everyone?
That sounds great. And I just, as a sign off, I just want to let all of you know the Fodzyme website has a facts section, has tons of information. A lot of your questions are going to be answered there. Also at FODMAP every day, someone's asking, where do you find a GI dietitian? We have a global directory. As I mentioned before, we have articles on IBS and IBD. Certainly come to our website as well. Between both of our websites, we will hopefully be able to answer your questions. So thank you so much, everybody. A ton of information squeezing into 60 minutes or so. We will follow up with those emails. This has been recorded, so you'll be able to review it again. And who knows, maybe we'll do another one. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody.